Thank you very much.
Please start now.
Thank you very much for the introduction. I hope that it's clearly audible. I mean, does it sound okay? Everything is understandable. It's comprehensible. You can hear what I'm talking about. Very good. So let's begin now talking about the foreign workers in South Korea in the context of general, in a way, general narrative about foreigners and foreigners in South Korea, and about generally the role of migration in the capitalist development. Everything is understandable so far?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, one thing I have to say sorry from the very beginning about is my English. It's not necessarily perfect. So I do speak with recognizable Russian accent. I'm trying to do everything to make my English more understandable. I also have a very bad habit of speaking too quickly. So I'm trying to slow myself down. Well, we are to talk today about foreign workers in South Korea. Foreign workers in South Korea are not as many as they are, for example, in Singapore or Hong Kong. However, the numbers are growing and they are extremely essential for some sectors of South Korean economy. Today, the general number of foreigners in Korea is around 4% of the population. It's a bit lower than average for European Union. Average for European Union would be around 6-7%. However, it is higher than in Japan, where the number of foreigners, including long-term residents, is under 3%. So in South Korea now, the proportion of foreigners is higher than in Japan. It's an interesting fact, actually. Foreigners in South Korea are generally either foreign workers or marriage migrants, mostly women who come to Korea to marry Korean men. In case of marriage migrants, as long as they didn't obtain South Korean citizenship, I have South Korean citizenship, for example, so I can stay in South Korea as long as I wish. But if you simply have a spouse visa given to the spouses of South Koreans, then it is valid only as long as you are married. If, for example, you cannot withstand any longer the violence wielded by your husband and decide to break out of the marriage, your visa becomes invalid, so you have to go out. You have to get out of South Korea. So the marriage migrants, for some period of time, are not necessarily the free equal citizens. Their rights are severely curtailed. Their rights are limited. The same goes actually for foreign workers. There are different categories of foreign workers. If they are ethnic Koreans, they are given special visa for overseas ethnic Koreans, Tonghopijan, as it's called in Korean, which gives a little bit more rights. It doesn't give right to permanent settlement, however. So they are not to become Koreans. The perspective of them being included as equal free citizens is again curtailed. If you are not an ethnic Korean, you are usually being a part of the so-called employment permit system, 고용포가제. Employment permit is exactly for employment, is not for living in Korea. One of the aims of this system is to prevent foreign workers from settling in South Korea permanently. They are supposed to be in South Korea for 3 or maximum 4 years and 9 months, and then they have to leave. No exceptions in principle. They are not supposed to bring their families to South Korea. They are not supposed to join unions. They are not supposed to change their workplace. So they do represent only partly free workforce. As a whole, foreign workers in Korea, including marriage migrants, migrants are only partly free. To some degree, you can talk about them as unfree labor force. Well, in fact, if you look at the Amnesty International report on the Korean employment practices vis-à-vis foreigners, there, for example, the employment of foreign workers in the Korean countryside as agricultural workers has been characterized as modern-day slavery. Amnesty International chose this expression because the workers, foreign workers at South Korean farms, cannot go to another place even if they are being beaten and abused. There are lots of instances of sexual abuse, forced overwork, unpayment of wages, wage theft, indulgence, and so on and so on. So to say, so Amnesty International literally compared the situation of foreign workers in South Korean agriculture to the slaves. Well, we should understand one thing. Slavery and capitalism are not necessarily opposites. We do know that, in fact, lots of capitalist systems coexist with some variations of unfree labor. United States is one of the premier model capitalist states, but it used to be a slave-owning society until the Civil War, as you certainly know. And today, much of America's service economy is based on partly unfree labor of the undocumented illegal immigrants. Nobody knows exactly how many those immigrants live in the United States. Estimations vary, maybe 11 millions, around 11 millions. Those people are paid very poorly. They are being abused, and exploiting them brings America's capitalists lots of profits, so lots of surplus profits. And those surplus profits, the profits extracted from the exploitation of the most low-paid, most vulnerable workforce, those profits are very important for the general development of the capitalism as a system in the United States. It's not only United States. Majority of capitalist countries have some provisions for laborers who are not going to be given citizenship rights and who can be exploited in a much harsher way than locals. So Korea is no exception, but there are some specific, Korean system of exploiting foreign, low-paid, and rightless labor has some specificity compared to, for example, systems common in European countries. In most European countries, foreigners, even if they are being exploited as low-paid workers in the beginning, still are offered the perspective of permanent settlement. You know, for example, the story of Koreans who were sent as miners and nurses to Western Germany since 1964. The story became famous because Park Geun-hye's favorite film, Ukchesijan, staged in Busan, featured one Chedok Mangbu and one Chedok Kanghosa, one miner and one nurse who were sent to Germany. Initially, they were just like foreign workers brought to Korea by the employment permit system. They were not supposed to change their workplaces, they were not to bring families, and they even were not taught German in the beginning. They were supposed to work and not to leave Germany. What happened in the end, however, is that their struggle and the struggle of German workers in favor of the foreign workers helped them to get the settlement rights. So in the end, now Germany has one of the largest Korean communities in Europe, around 50,000 people. And I'm in Korean studies, as Son Johnson has just mentioned. In fact, the biggest Korean studies in Europe are in Germany, since there are so many Koreans there. Well, in South Korea, however, such things are not happening. and not going to happen. The Bangladeshi, Pakistani, Uzbek workers brought to Korea through employment permit system, Koyong Kokache, are to stay in Korea for 3 or 4 years, maximum for 4 years and 9 months, and then they have to leave. They are blocked from staying permanently, and there is no social movement in Korea struggling for giving them the same. Ethnic Koreans who come to Korea to work, Chosun Job, ethnic Koreans from China, or Korean ethnic Koreans from former Soviet Union, are given larger periods of stay, but even in their cases, they are not supposed to stay in South Korea permanently. So South Korean regime of exploiting cheap foreign labor is much harsher compared to the regimes in Western Europe, because it doesn't, in principle, imply that the foreigners are going to be offered permanent settlement in the perspective. Their foreigners are to be exploited and sent back. That's it. Unless they are marriage migrants, in which case they are basically to be assimilated. What Korean state and Korean society demand of their mostly women, mostly foreign women who marry Korean men, is that they learn Korean and that they raise their children as Koreans. Their children, even if their mothers come from Philippines, the Philippines or Vietnam, are not supposed to learn Tagalog Filipinian language or Vietnamese in the schools. There are no schools in Korea offering Vietnamese or Tagalog for the children from mixed families. They are to learn Korean only and become Koreans. So they are to be fully assimilated. Again, it differs a lot from Europe. In Europe, if you come from a mixed family, you in principle have the right to the education in your own mother's language, so to say. So, for example, my younger sister lives in Finland now, so her children, my nephews, are speaking both Russian and Finnish. So one of them went to school. He was the only Russian-speaking child in the whole class. But the school had to find him a Russian teacher. Because in Finland, all the minority children have the legal right to education in their mother's tongue, if it's different from Finnish. Nothing like this exists in Korea, and it's not supposed to happen. So Korean system of exploiting foreign labor is basically similar in essence to most capitalist countries, but it's a bit harsher if you compare it to many countries in Europe. Well, let's now see how the whole thing began. Foreign labor emerged in case of Japan, which Park-Geun-hye regime used as a benchmark for economical development. In case of Japan, foreigners started to come in the 1970s, taking the jobs which native Japanese no longer wanted. Some of them were from Asian countries, South Asia, mostly Vietnam and the Philippines especially, and some of them were Nikkei, the same as Tongko in the Korean case. Nikkei was Japanese in third, fourth generation, coming mostly from Latin America. So the Japanese state gave Nikkei some privileges, just like Tongko are given some privileges in South Korea today. Nikkei could stay for a longer time, but they were not supposed to become Japanese in the end, so to say. South Asians were, however, subjected to much harsher treatment. For South Asians, and later for Chinese, a special system called Sangyo Yonsusei, Sanok Yonsusen in Korean, the industrial training system was devised. So South Asians and Chinese were not to work in Japan, but legally just to train for 2-3 years. They got very small salaries, around 1/10 of what average Japanese would get, and the salaries were usually fully paid only on departure. So they had to leave Japan and got their money only immediately before leaving. So Japanese were trying to prevent them from settling in Japan. That was industrial training system. What happened in Korea? In the late 1980s, Korea was gradually becoming a middle-level wage society, high-wage society by Asian standards. First and foremost, because of the labor organization, because Korean workers no longer were going just to sit and wait for the state to redistribute the fruits of the industrial development. There was a huge strike wave in 1987, Nodong Tetkujen, the great struggle, and after this, the wages in Korea started to grow very quickly. So Korean capital needed cheaper workers, desperately needed cheaper workers, and one way to provide cheaper workers was to follow the Japanese example. And after 1988 Olympics, Korea became sort of more or less famous place. I mean, became a household name in Asia. Korean dream began to spread around Asian countries. Very overdrawn, very exaggerated ideas about how prosperous Korea is started to spread around South Asian, especially households. So South Asians now would be brought to Korea as part of Sanok Yonsusen, the industrial training system. Basically, the Japanese Sangyoken Susei were renamed, in Korean pronunciation is going to be Sanok Yonsusen, and the same system as in Japan was introduced in Korea. The system was terrible for the workers and very good for the small and middle-sized enterprises, who could now exploit foreign workers for as small a pittance as, say, 200,000, 300,000 won. I remember when I first came to Korea in 1991, I had heard that, in fact, my stipend, I was to receive stipend at Korea University. My stipend was bigger than the allowance of the industrial trainees from Bangladesh on account. They were given less than 200,000 won, isim won, basically small money. So they were paid much, much less than South Korean workers. They were to work for 2 or 3 years, and then they were to be sent back. They were not even acknowledged as workers. They were just Yonsusen trainees. And lots of abuse was happening. Their passports were confiscated. They were beaten, verbally abused, and so on, and so on. So what started to happen after this is that those workers understood very soon that they are not being trained, was very little training. They were not even given safety training. And the proportion of injuries among foreign trainees was extremely high. The workers started to run away from their designated workplaces, since they understood very quickly that they can find a factory which would offer them almost Korean salary for the same amount of labor. So, by the end of the 1990s, a huge number of undocumented, so-called illegal workers came to live in South Korea. At that point, we are talking about 200,000-300,000 people. The South Korean authorities were regularly making campaigns to strike hard on them, so-called Tansok campaign. Those campaigns were often quite cruel. The workers were trying to run away from the immigration officials, resulting in deaths and injuries. And by the end of the 1990s, South Korea got extremely bad reputation, especially among the Asian countries, as a society where human rights of foreign workers are not respected at all. South Korea got very, very bad reputation, especially in places which had historically been victimized by South Koreans during Park Chung-hee rule, like in Vietnam, where South Korean soldiers left very bad memories after themselves. So the anti-Korean mood was spreading. It was clear to the Korean ruling class, especially in the time of Kim Dae-jung, who was a liberal and who was trying to make Korea's image better. Was in time of Kim Dae-jung that South Korea got the Human Rights Commission and so on. So it was trying to right the worst abuses, human rights abuses, it became clear to South Korea's rulers that the system is not sustainable. South Korea's reputation was falling down. So, the year 2003, the new liberal government, No Moo-hyun's government, introduced the employment permit system, 고용 허가제. The aim was to reduce the number of undocumented workers, who were also very difficult to control. And South Korean government doesn't like. If there are other people in South Korea whom it doesn't control, government likes to control everything. All governments are like this. So the aim was to prevent too many workers from becoming undocumented, to control them, but also to prevent foreign workers from settling down for good. For the South Korean bureaucrats, foreign workers were good as long as they were foreign, so you could pay them a bit smaller salary. And if they were to become Koreans, they could no longer be discriminated in their salaries. But also South Korean bureaucrats didn't like the thought about foreign enclaves inside the Korean society, since from their viewpoint, such enclaves are difficult to control. 통치하기 어렵다. It's difficult to control. So to say, there was lots of talks about 다문화, multicultural society since the year 2003-2004. Multicultural society became a buzzword in South Korea. But in reality, the last thing South Korean bureaucrats wanted was multicultural society. They wanted foreign people, predominantly women, to come to Korea either to work and get out in some years, or to marry, assimilate, or stay. They didn't want multicultural. They wanted, for example, foreign women to come to marry Korean men and to give birth to their little children. Because South Korea has extremely bad demographical statistics. South Korea's birth rate is among the lowest in the whole world. So foreign women were needed for sakes of demographical policies. But multiculture was not needed. So to say, the last thing South Korean bureaucrats wanted was multiculture. So the new employment permit system envisioned foreign workers, mostly men, coming to South Korea basically for 3 years and living inside South Korean society without belonging to South Korean society. Foreigners were to remain forever foreigners. They were to live in specially designated dormitories. They were not supposed to bring their families with them. 가족 동반금지 was called. They were not allowed to join the unions, because if you join a union, you can participate in wage negotiations and you can get higher salaries. But if the foreign workers are to be paid high salaries, why be? So they were prohibited from joining unions and even prohibited from changing their workplace, unless your employer goes bad. Unless the employer goes back. Otherwise, they were prohibited even from changing their workplace. So they were to belong to one factory, in a way, just like sort of property. And in 3 years, or maximum in 4 years and 9 months, they were to live free. In some cases, during the past years, they sometimes were readmitted. If they spoke good Korean, and if the government would acknowledge them as 성신 근로자, diligent workers. Not everybody was to that. But now it looks like the Justice Ministry of Korea looks even those people from re-entered Korea. So everything was done to keep their wages a bit lower than average and to prevent them from becoming Koreans. So to say, that is to prevent Korea from becoming a really multicultural society. But what happened after this is that the stated aim of the policy was not fully achieved. The undocumented workers didn't disappear. There are still lots of undocumented workers in South Korea. All in all, in South Korea, the number of foreigners now is around 2 million, including everybody. So among those 2 millions, The workers who have worked as a part of employment permit system is around 250,000 people, but the number of undocumented or illegal workers is also around 200,000 people. It looks as if the number of illegal residents, undocumented workers, legal not job, has actually been slowly increasing during the last year. So they didn't disappear. The reason is very simple. If the system is oppressive and the system prevents the foreigners from settling down in Korea, the foreigners will be trying to cheat the system. It's only normal. All migrants do like this. So to say so, there are still the people in South Korea, foreigners in South Korea, who are undocumented and whom the government doesn't control in the way the government wishes to do so. When it comes to the human rights of foreign workers, government of President Roh Moo-hyun wanted also somehow to improve South Korea's human rights, which is terrible. However, these human rights of foreign workers, there were some improvements, but they were only very, very partial. Still, if you look at the statistics, the industrial pragmatism, the accident rate among the foreign workers is still higher than among Koreans, and only half of them get duly compensated for this. So you still have a lot of foreign workers getting injured, sometimes maimed for life, often killed. And not in all cases accidents are acknowledged as industrial accidents, not in all cases compensation is being paid. Still, if you look at the results of the polls among the foreign workers, even if they are not illegal, you still find out that around half of them report verbal or physical abuse. It's still very common. If you talk to foreign workers, especially South Asian workers living and working in Korea, they tell you that the first Korean word that they learn is kesek, the son of bitch, basically. That's how they are called. That's how it's usual to call them. I talked to thousands of foreign workers when I was in Korea. I used to teach Korean history to foreign workers at the end of the 1990s, and I often meet foreign workers, especially from Central Asia, every time I go to Korea. What they tell me, many of them speak decent Korean. Most of them don't speak very good Chondaeman. They just know Panwa, the familiar style of the speech. The reason is very simple. Nobody uses Chondaeman to them. So it's hard for them to find out that Chondaeman exists. Everybody uses Chondaeman to them at their factories. So the human rights abuses still persist. There are some completely terrible cases still happening. For example, recently it was reported in South Korean newspapers that a woman from Thailand who lived in Korea for 1/3 of her short life, more than 10 years, she was technically illegal immigrant, undocumented worker, and it was the period of clampdown campaign council. So she was afraid of immigration officials who were going to come and apprehend her. So one of her co-workers, a Korean male, told her that he could protect her, but instead he raped her and murdered her. She died. The case was widely reported in Thailand. So to say, of course, crimes happen everywhere, but such crimes here are possible because of the enormous fear that immigration authorities are sort of the atmosphere of fear that immigration authorities have been made in connection also vis-a-vis the foreign workers population of Korea. So yet another aspect of all this is a sort of divide and rule policy. Foreign workers are divided into different categories. There are undocumented workers who are subjected to this clampdown council campaigns terrorized by immigration officials. Then there are Hoyong Hogaje, the immigration permit holders who are to live in Korea impermanently. Many of them would like to settle in Korea. In fact, a number of them, most of them are single foreign males. Number of them are cohabiting with Koreans and women. So they would love to make their families in Korea permanently. Around 20% of them are understood to have made some arrangements to settle down in Korea, despite the official policy of preventing them from settling down. So to say, so there are unregistered workers, there are employment permit holders, and then there are different holders of other visas. For example, specialist visa is different thing. And yet, then there are four ethnic Korean visas. All those visas give different rights. So to say, the only common point is that foreign workers, by definition, are not supposed to settle permanently. If you are a married migrant, however, and you have a marriage visa, then you are being allowed permanent settlement. You are being often given free of charge Korean classes. And one thing that is very much emphasized in relationship to the foreign women who marry Koreans is that they have to learn not only Korean language, but also the Korean etiquette, very conservative version of etiquette. They have to learn how to bow down, they have to learn how to bow down to the mother-in-law, and so on and so on. And of course, they have to learn how to make kimchi. So they are to be assimilated. What is called officially Tamunghwa, multicultural policy in Korea, in reality is very much Donghwa Chongchek, is assimilation policy. So the women married to Koreans are to be assimilated, and their children are forced to. And the foreign workers are to be prevented from settling down. Also, at the same time, they're divided into many categories, making their solidarity and common struggle very difficult. Also, they're coming from very different states, often have difficulties communicating with each other. There is a foreign workers movement in Korea, and there is even a registered labor union made by foreign workers. But again, the union mostly consists of Nepali and Bangladeshi workers. So to say, and it's relatively small, it doesn't represent that many foreign workers. Most of them are still prevented from joining the union. Foreign workers sometimes strike, but again, so far those strikes were very isolated and received little support from among South Korean workers. Well, one reason for the relative isolation of foreign workers' movement is the fact that Korean workers' movement is structurally very divided. You have permanent Kyongyujik workers, non-permanent workers, and around 70% of permanent workers' unions even don't accept non-permanent workers as their members. So to say that even Korean workers are very much divided. It's easier to rule than that. So to say, and of course, it's very difficult for the foreign workers to collaborate with them in such a situation. So there is a solidarity between the foreign workers movement and Korean labor, but it's very, very limited. So if we are to make some sort of conclusions, basically, whether authorities wish it or not, South Korea has been developing de facto in reality as a much more multi-ethnic society than before. So to say, now, as I have said, around 4% of South Korean population is foreign, and despite authorities' policy, those people, even if they are being prevented from settling down, often are trying very hard to settle down. Authorities don't want the enclaves of foreigners to exist in Korea, but those enclaves, in fact, do exist. For example, if you travel to Ansan, to famous Wolbukton, the, well, Kukyonomnen Maul, the village without boundary. It's very much foreigner-populated area. So to say, so de facto, in reality, South Korea is becoming much more multi-ethnic society. And since the South Korean population is expected soon to decline, South Korea most likely will badly need immigration, just like most European countries. So most likely, if we look at a longer perspective, the proportion of immigrants in Korea would be close to proportion of immigrants in, say, Germany or France in, say, 15, 20 years. Most likely, South Korea will go the same way. One additional reason for this is that South Korea is the great manufacturing hub of the world. Still, 30% of South Korean GDP is in manufacturing. And manufacturing in South Korea is the dual-layered industry. You have chaebols, the conglomerates, operates on the top, and they have number of subcontractors. Subcontractors have much worse conditions of labor and much worse salaries, but without those subcontractors, chaebols would never be as competitive as they are, so to say. So even now, among the smallest companies, the foreign workers are a very sizable part of the workforce, around 20% among the smallest companies. Probably in this bottom layer of South Korean industry, the significance of foreign labor will continuously increase. So I guess that despite the reluctance of the South Korean authorities, South Korea is going to develop as de facto multi-ethnic society. The question is how to make this process less violent, more harmonious, and how to prevent human rights abuses in this process. I think that as long as South Korean authorities will continue to attempt to prevent foreigners from settling down, things only will get worse. Foreigners will settle down anyway. So to say, if they have families in Korea, if they prefer working in Korea, if they already learn Korean, and so on, so it's very difficult to prevent them from settling down unless you really use extremely harsh measures. And those workers are badly needed by the Korean industry. So to say, so what the best thing to do for the South Korean government and society is to stop trying to prevent foreigners from settling down and just to allow foreign migrants, including men working in the industry, to permanently settle. That will be a great progress, so to say. Today's South Korean immigration policy is largely modeled on Japan or Singapore. The countries which, in principle, want to prevent foreigners, excluding certain categories, from settling down there. But it is much better for the future of South Korean society if its model will be, for example, the policies of European countries in which such settlement is allowed. I don't want to idealize European immigration policies. I think they often are very cruel, so to say, and they are much, much less permissive than many people think, but still, in principle, they allow foreigners to settle down. I think that South Korea would only benefit from doing the same. And then if we would like to have real multiculturalism, that means literally, many cultures. Then we have to recognize the citizenship rights for other cultures as well. But in today's South Korea, you basically have only two cultures. You have Minmunghwa, that is a Korean language, standard Korean language-based mainstream Korean culture, and you have Anglo-American culture. You have English, the language which we use now, as basically the most prestigious language in South Korea. You have two cultures. You have either American culture or Korean culture, and both of them are closely interrelated. In a way, all other cultures are, sidelined, marginalized. I have never heard about any Korean school, for example, which would try to teach children, for example, Urdu, the language of Pakistan, or Bengali, the language of Bangladesh. How many schools are teaching Vietnamese now? So to say, so even if you have ethnic Pakistani, Bangladeshi, or Vietnamese background, it's very difficult to live with your culture in South Korea. So what I think what we really need is real, authentic multiculturalism. But then we have to change many things. We have, for example, to change South Korean textbooks. In today's world history textbooks, how much can you learn about Vietnam, about the Philippines, about Bangladesh or Pakistan? In Bengali, you have some of the greatest poesy in the world, including great Rabindranath Tagore, who also wrote about Korea. It's in Bengali. But again, how many Koreans know about it? So to say, we have to change our paradigm of viewing the outer world. Today, our worldview is very self-centered on the one hand, on the other hand is extremely Europe, America-centric, so to say. In Korea's customary perception of outer world, the center of the world is somewhere between London and New York. So to say, that is the center from which everything emanates. And Sonjingu, the capitalist, rich capitalist countries are admired, sometimes very unrealistically, and the rest of the world is being lumped down as Hujingu. That is the countries in which the Koreans have no interest and which have to admire us. So this worldview is extremely hierarchical and very disrespectful vis-a-vis the people who are being all lumped down as Hujingu, so to say. Southeast Asians are not even called foreigners. I mean, in daily speech, you don't hear about them being referred to as foreigners. They are Tongnama Edu, compared to, for example, Americans who are Debugi no Nibugi, so to say. So I often witness how in Seoul subway, if there were lots of vacant places, the Korean people were evading sitting together with the foreign workers. So to say, as if foreign workers are dangerous. And you have all those recent films about police hunting down Chinese, Korean, Joseon criminals, which spread very prejudiced stereotypes about ethnic Koreans from China, so to say. So discrimination here is not only racial, basically I see it sort of economic racism. Not only foreigners, but also ethnic Koreans from the areas which are understood to be poorer than Korea are being equally discriminated. It's sort of economical racism. So what we have to do if we are to remain Korea as authentically multicultural society, we have to seriously reconsider those economical racism patterns as well, and seriously reconsider the way in which we perceive the outer world. The perception of outer world has to be much more inclusive, and it should not be so lopsided, so much concentrated on rich Anglo-American or European world as it is today, so to say. And of course, the laws are to be changed, because today's legal system vis-a-vis related to foreign workers is complicated. It doesn't help Korea to become an authentically multi-cultural, multiracial society. Well, I guess that my 40 minutes are over now, so now I think I have to stop, and I guess that we still have 15 to 20 minutes for questions and answers, right? Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Professor Bach. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes. Yeah.
So if you have any question, come up here and ask Professor Bach directly here.